Well, anyway, it's been a while since I've seen you. I'm glad to see you again.
Same here. Thank you.
So tell me about what you saw at the airport.
Oh, yes, it was very interesting. I went to pick up my relatives. They were arriving from Russia, and there was a large group of people, and I could see that, I can tell the ritualistic Buddhist things like, the white scarves that Tibetans greet each other with.
Okay.
So there's look like people from Nepal and India and a few Westerners, and they all had the scarves at the ready. So I thought some high Lama or teacher is probably arriving soon. So I asked them, and they said yes, that on the same plane as this teacher is arriving from Russia. He's originally from Nepal, so he's. They gave me the name, and I looked him up, and he kind of looks familiar, but I've never read his teachings or anything. But what was interesting is when he did arrive, however, ran to be first in line to greet him, and I thought the scarves were for him, but no, the scarves are for the person that has the scarf, and then I guess there's some kind of blessing or something happens. And I found this kind of.
So he touches the scarf?
Yeah.
He touches? Yeah, okay. All right.
On their neck.
Yeah, add a bit of ectoplasm or something.
And I found a bit of aversion in myself. At first I thought, oh, it's so nice. It's a group of Buddhists. Wouldn't it be nice to belong to a group of that? But when I saw them running towards the teacher and like kind of fighting to be first to say hi to him and getting in line to get their scarves blessed, I was a little bit turned off. So this situation where the teacher becomes so popular, the mob kind of grows around them, and not so good.
We can put all of that under the label of spiritual materialism. That everything about the physical world, including all of big business, all of big government, all of big education, and especially all of big religion, even though the teachings of Jesus is basically to go within, all of big religion is all about what's going on in the outside world. Doing communions, doing ceremonies, getting blessings, etc., like that. And so there is a large group of people worldwide, and as you were saying, many of these were Asians-oriented anyway. But there is a kind of mentality that's very devotionally oriented. And that devotion has to do with their relationship to the outside world in whatever respect or whatever terminology they want to use, whether it's a guru or a god or whatever like that, but it's kind of devotional. And you can see that that component is probably a lot stronger within Catholicism than it is in evangelical. And yet it's still there in the evangelical. All right. So basically what we're talking about is that guru, either consciously or subconsciously, is setting himself up to be nothing more than the object of the delusions in the minds of the people who are there to get their scarf blessed, thinking that there's going to be some sort of benefit from having contact with the guru. All right, this is actually very, very Indian oriented, and that Tibet, you see, the thing about Buddhism is that Buddhism always goes into a culture without taking over that culture, but sort of undermines that culture in the minds of the people who become Buddhist, so that they actually are not part of the culture. But something happened along the way, and that what happened at about 300 BC in the time of Ashoka, when the emperor made he invented the Buddhist religion mistakenly, And how he invented the Buddhist religion was by giving royal patronage to the Sangha. And because of that, many others from all of the various other religious traditions, and believe me, in India it was a big mess. We normally put it into Brahmanism as the main label because they were the ones who were the most powerful. But a better way of looking at it is just animism, all kinds of things. And in fact, in India now, if you go there to the various temples, you'll find one that's full of rats, another one that's full of monkeys, another one. I mean, there's just really weird stuff all over the place. There are fire temples, and you would recognize that, oh, wait a minute, the original histories of these things grew up independently into then as a collective that the British called Hinduism. But in fact, there are so many different deities, and all they do is just collect them all together. But there is one group that will be Shivites. There will another one that will be Kali Durga. Another one will be Brahman. Another one will be Vishnu. Others will go after Rama, and all kinds of things like that. But that diversity in India was there from the very beginning, to where Christianity has splintered. All the various 40,000 different kinds of Christianity in the United States actually splintered off from the original Catholic Church, and that it originally also had a split off between Eastern and Orthodox. But they too have had some splits between Greek and Russian and Coptic and a few other things. So everything got splintered within Christianity, to where everything in India was already really diverse. Now, the teachings of the Buddha was a teaching against all of that various diversity. That's an amazing point to take. He was the rebel. He was the one who was pointing out that none of these religions and none of these religious practices ever do what they promise to do. And in fact, even the promise itself is very elusive. What is the promise? What's the point of religion? They say to go to heaven, but then people nowadays, they think about the various old versions of heaven, and it says, wait a minute, I do not want to listen to harp music for 10,000 years. I would rather run around in hell chasing the various devilettes than to be in heaven. All right, and so the whole idea is gotten mixed up. We don't really know what the object of the religion is anymore. But the real object of the religion, the whole point of everything getting started, was because the human beings were basically dissatisfied with things and they wanted satisfaction. They wanted to have completeness, to have wholeness, and yet all we've got is fractured and disunity. And that fractured and disunity has to do with, as we've talked before, the instincts. The self-preservation instinct of one species goes directly against the self-preservation instinct of another species. For instance, wolves and rabbits. And yet they have, and so the instinct itself for self-preservation then diversifies. And because of that, the suffering remains, or actually is increasing rather than decreasing. And the Buddha figured out that what the real problem is that there is this suffering, and that people don't know where it comes from or what it's caused by. And like all of the rest of the world, for instance, the cause and effect of the whole world is, if I eat food, I'll survive. If I can put a coat on, I'll be warm. If I can have a weapon, I can get protected. Therefore, if I'm going to protect myself from suffering, I've got to do it with the same kind of tools that I have always been using, which is stuff on the outside. All right. And so that outside-inside conflict is now built into the human mind right from our genes, right into our ways of thinking. And that brings up a question, and that question is really an issue of doubt. And the question really is whose fault is all of this mess? Who can I blame for all of my trouble? All right. And so there's been a whole lot of ready-made answers for that. And that the karma is one of them. Oh, you feel bad now because of old bad past karma. That's one of the stories. But that's actually an upside down version of the original story. The original story was when Brahmins were beginning to lose their power and authority because of all of the outside influences, including the fact that Mesopotamia had literally fallen apart. And a lot of Indo-Europeans were coming into India and coming in with their armies and all of that. And the old landlords, the old landowners who were the Brahmins, were feeling put upon. And so they were trying to maintain their position. This happened around 800 BC when they says, oh, we are Brahmin, we are best. We are the very best. We're the priest. We're the very high class here. And you're not. You're invaders, or you're dirt workers, or you're the toilet cleaners, or you're the farmers, or you're the merchants, or whatever. But we're the Brahmins. We're the big stuff. And the question then is, well, so what? What makes you a Brahmin, and why is it hereditary, etc., like that? And they say, oh, we were Brahmin, we were born Brahmin in the Brahmin clan because we were good in the past. And you were not born Brahmin because you were not good in the past. Now, this is the actual birth of the law of karma that has become so universal now. Now, that law of karma is stated basically this way. Every action is either a good action or a bad action, and every good action will give good results, and every bad action will give bad results. Now, that's a very, very simple statement, but if you recognize the complexity of carrying that out, and identification of souls and how much horsepower of computing you have for observation and how many eyes and how many skies and how many hard drives it take to store the data, as well as the AI to process to figure out what's an action and what's it good and whether it's bad or not and what the weight of it is and how to store it. And it winds up being an enormous exercise. However, thinking about it like that is the kinds of things that a computer scientist will do, and he'll come to see it's a bunch of bull. But it works on children. It works on children in the sense that because children don't have wisdom, they do not have the mind of a trained computer scientist. And so you can tell the children, if you do good, you'll get a reward, and the actual parents will then demonstrate that law of karma to them. So when the child does something good, the parent will reward them, and when the child does something bad, then the parent will punish them. In other words, the parent becomes the role model for the law of karma. Now, one of the problems with the law of karma is that it becomes absolute. And the reason that it wants that people want the law of karma to be absolute is because of the issue of revenge. He did me wrong, and now he's dead. I've got to do something in my mind to get my revenge for him, so I'm going to imagine that he's in hellfire. All right, so this is the whole quality of it. You can imagine that the old rich man on the hill has been robbing the community forever, for his whole life, and they all hate him. When he's dead, he has a nice big funeral, but everybody's really happy that the man's dead, and they're all hoping that he's going to get his because he ripped them off, right? This is really one of the major reasons to have an idea of hell, is so we can take revenge on the people who have hurt us, because we're still playing that same game of the outside world. In other words, we're blaming him for all of our suffering. Yes, he ripped us off, But me feeling bad about being ripped off is my responsibility. And that's where the line begins to make some changes here is that, wait a minute, who's responsible for the suffering is never on the outside. That the real issue of suffering is that it's created mentally. That's the second noble truth that the Buddha came across. So in reality, what the Buddha did is he looked at the nature of suffering and he realized, oh, every individual creates their own suffering. And they do so in this present moment, and they do so out of the habits that they have had, but this does not come out of some karma machine. Now, the Buddha also recognized, and in fact, this is an important point, that the karma, good actions, there are things that are good actions. And good actions do lead to good results. That's part of the quality of it being a good action. For instance, you're very, very thirsty. You come in to your house and you're very, very thirsty, and then you get a drink of water, and that getting a drink of water is a good action, and it relieves the thirst. It's based actually on cause effect. If you do good causes, the effect will be good, and if you do causes that are bad, they will have a bad effect. That's just the way things are naturally. And the Buddha recognizes that naturalness, part of the quality of the law of karma, so that there are good actions and bad actions. But most actions are mixed with mixed motives and do not fall into that law of karma. What do we mean by mixed actions? Well, imagine any sport game, and then imagine that a penalty flag or something flies, and then half the people jump into the air and they're screaming and hollering with praise and they really like it. But then another half of the whole crowd is jumping up in the air and screaming and hollering the exact opposite. So good and bad action, we don't know. It depends upon a perspective or a point of view. All right, so that's another issue. Now, what happened is that with this belief in karma that has the long-lasting quality, so that if I do not outlive the results of my bad actions, then those bad actions have to be stored somehow and then later forwarded so that they can catch up with whatever is being reincarnated. Now, in the Hindu version of this, or in the Brahmanistic version of this, it is, even in the time of the Buddha, it was what they called consciousness that ran and circled around from one birth to the next, experiencing the good and the bad actions of the past and creating new actions. But the Buddha, when he had heard that, this is, by the way, in Sutta number 38, where the Buddha said that that's not true, that consciousness is dependently arisen, that there are actually two major kinds of consciousness, and that these two kinds of consciousness are in the English language, the way we use the word consciousness, but they also use this sometimes even in the Pali. The primary use of the word consciousness is to be conscious of the sense organ. In other words, the eye can see an object, and the eye with the processing becomes conscious of that visual object. When we hear, we become conscious of what we're hearing. When we touch, when we taste, these are consciousnesses that are registered in the brain that we sense something. In that regard, a light switch is conscious. You flip that switch and the light turns on. That means that there was some kind of consciousness inside that light switch that turned the electricity on. It was responding. Cause-effect relationships. This is what we mean by consciousness, but it's a very complex consciousness that happens for the eye, with colors, forms, shapes, movements, all kinds of things that happen with the eye in eye consciousness. All right, so consciousness is dependently arisen, and that's the most important thing. So it's very much like fire. We call fire by its fuel, like a house fire or a car fire or a laptop fire or a a grass fire, a heart-on fire. Those are the kinds of things that we talk about, and we use consciousness the same way. But there's also a different kind of consciousness that has another kind of language for it, and this is the consciousness that a lot of philosophers are thinking about. And that's we'll use the word seeing, because there's two ways to see. One is to see the object. I see that tree. I can see your image on the laptop. And the other one is, oh, I see what you mean. That kind of consciousness is an internal consciousness. It's an internal representation. We've talked about paticca samuppada. This is in that regard is what is called the salayatana. Now the senses themselves are the atana. So the salayatana is actually the internal version of the senses. So when we see something with the eye, it registers on the inside as this consciousness. So therefore, all of this kind of consciousness is very temporary. It's very fleeting. And yet it gives us the delusion that it's there all the time, because when it is off, there's no consciousness. And when it's on, then it's consciousness. It's very much like the film. I remember telling you about the projector, that it would only be on half the time, and then it would go off, and then the thing would move, and then it would turn back on again. The mind is also very much like that. And so the Hindus thinking that it would be consciousness that would be reborn off into the future is crazy, because consciousness doesn't even last any time at all. How could it last over hundreds of years and then reappear when in fact it up and down and up and down, up and down on a very regular basis? So this is why there was a kind of a change from reincarnation into the belief of rebirth. Because rebirth is a kind of reincarnation that does not have consciousness as its object to be reborn. And so whatever it is reborn is kind of nebulous. Because anytime that you go back to try to figure out what it is that's being reborn, you're actually trying to make rebirth back into reincarnation, something that is reincarnated. The word kar here is the same word as the word kaya. Reincarnation means to bring it back to life, or to bring it back into physical existence. And yet we realize now, through the teachings of the Buddha, that whatever it is reincarnated. It cannot be consciousness, because consciousness is dependent. For instance, it's dependent upon the eye. This eye. Not some future eye that's going to be born in a baby, that's not the same thing. This gives people the concept that, well, if it's not really me that's being reborn, then why should I give a flying rip about it anyway? And that's when we can start to get rid of this kind of stuff, is because rebirth is sort of like, imagine it's like this, like a set of stairs. And up here is reincarnation, or the Christian soul, or something that's really there after death. And the Buddha stuff is way, way down here. Ain't nothing there, all right? And so the next step down then it would be rebirth. And then the next step down below that would be atheism. And then the step below that would be the actual teaching of the Buddha. All right? And so rebirth says that there is nothing that can be reborn, but yet there is rebirth because we have this karma machine that has to have some sort of fulfillment. That it all depends upon the karma machine, the absolute belief that a good action will eventually give a good result, no matter who it gives that good result to, or how many centuries it takes to store that information and then forward it, even if it's to the wrong one. This is the belief system. But the Buddha was talking about it actually in Sutra number 12 in the Lion's Roar. The Buddha talks about that he understands karma as cause and effect, which happens very quickly, very immediately. But he also, and this is, by the way, the second of 10 of the lion's roars, the first one is that the lion is the one who knows the difference between what is possible, and that which is impossible he knows to be impossible. This is an important point because we can understand intellectually and go right down to the very core of it. When we really go down to the core of who we are, we can figure out that there is nothing really there that's substantial enough even to survive the next moment or two. Never mind being substantial enough to survive death. There's nothing in there that's substantial enough to survive a moment or two. Never mind something in there that's substantial enough to survive death. And then when we get to that point, then we recognize, oh, wait a minute, this whole idea of being reborn or being reincarnated or being sent to heaven is all an escape from death itself, which you and I have talked about. It's an escape from death because we're afraid of death. And so if some old preacher comes by and says, oh, you take Jesus as your Savior and thou shalt be saved and then you will not die, you will go to heaven, that's a pretty delicious idea for people who are afraid of death. Unfortunately, many of the people who heard that, even when they get very, very old, they still are afraid of death because they're really not sure. That in fact, have you ever heard the statement, there are no atheists in foxholes?
No.
You never heard that? This is an old Christian adage that there are no atheists in foxholes. In the foxhole is so dangerous that everybody becomes a Christian, right? My answer to that, yes, there are no atheists in foxholes because the atheists were too smart to fall for the platter that says, come join us, be a patriot, and join the army. Atheists are too smart to join the army. They're not going to be in the foxholes. So there are no atheists in foxholes. But I'm going to turn that around now for you. There are no Christians at funerals. Why? Because if there were Christians at funerals, they'd be happy. They'd say, oh, Uncle George is in heaven. Yippee-ki-yo-ki-yay. I'm so happy for George. Oh, I want to go next. No. You never hear that. Oh, no. All you hear is fear and loathing and trepidation and consolences and they're there now. God will rest your soul. And nobody believes it. There are no Christians ever at any funerals. But don't go to a funeral and announce that. They'll kill you. You'll have a funeral of your own. Why is that? It's because of the doubt. There is always going to be doubt. Because the doubt is based on the fear of death. And so basically what happens is the doubt comes in two forms. One side of the doubt is, whose fault is this mess? Is it my own damn fault? Or can I blame somebody? Can I blame the religion? Can I blame the government? Can I blame my education? Can I blame my education that my mommy gave me when I was 4 years? She spanked me when I was 3 years old, and I've been an asshole my whole life, and it's her fault. So we play this blame game. That allows us to play the blame game with God and play the blame game with the karma machine. That in fact, the karma machine is nothing but God Himself incarnate, or as what do they call it? Not animatronics, personalization.
Anthropomorphism.
That's the word I'm looking for. You've got it right. So God is the anthropomorphized version of the karma machine. And it's His job to figure out what He's going to do with you. But the Hindu version of the karma machine is much, much more sophisticated. God's got so much more work to do in the Hindu version of the karma machine. That God only has to make one choice at one time, yes or no, to get you into heaven. But the karma machine, oh, what complexity. So let's go back and look at it from a bit of history. One of the things that we can look at is that the Buddha was a rebel right from the very beginning. But he appealed to a certain kind of people. He appealed to two groups, in fact. One is he appealed to the nobility, because that was the clan that he was from. And he also appealed to all of those who were caught up in what we will call the spiritual awakening of the time. That something happened on the planet Earth somewhere between 600 and 400 BC that gave rise to all of the best known. Zarathustra, Mahavira, Jeremiah, some of the prophets, Zoroaster, I think I mentioned, Socrates, Lao Tzu, Confucius, the Buddha. Wow, what a rich mix worldwide, all about the same time. But also in India at that time, there was a huge mass influx into the various religions that practiced various religious practices. And so when the Buddha left the palace, he went with his entourage, and they went to some of the very best ones. So he kind of got the Harvard PhD degree in jhana practice from this guy, and the PhD, Harvard PhD in austerities from this group. But he already had a Harvard PhD in the Brahman Vedas, because he got that as a young man, as well as some of the meditation, jhana practices, all of that. So what he did to get his organization growing was he would go back to some of the people that he had known before to teach them what he had known, and he always went to the high ones, to the top, to the other teachers. Because if he could talk to them and convince them that their beliefs in rebirth and reincarnation and all of the stuff that they were believing in was not the right path, that the right path was to go inside and clean up your own mind. And so when he would get one of them or two of them as the top leader, the entire 500 students that they had would join the Buddha. And so that's why the organization grew as fast as it did, leaving the old Brahmin guard greatly frustrated, because the Buddha was actually not only thinning out their ranks of their own students and their own kids, but he was also thinning out the ranks of the householders and wealthy people in town who were donating to the Brahmins, donating groceries like cows and sheep and horses and things for animal sacrifices, and slinging some blood around. I mean, the Brahmins and the Levites in the Jewish tradition, very similar at that period of time, very bloodthirsty. That's what Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, that's what he was against, was all of the animal sacrifice, all the bloodletting that was done in the temple in at the time when the Babylonians came to invade, claiming that, it was because of the blood sacrifices that the Babylonians came, and you thought that the blood sacrifices are going to keep you safe. In fact, it didn't. But none of that is the point. What is the point is that the Buddha was really, really cutting in on the Brahmins from that time. But all along, he had royal patronage, and it wasn't until many hundreds of years later that the Brahmins were actually able to take revenge. And the opportunity happened when King Asok came to be the royal patron. And so there was a mass influx of new monks that were coming for the royal patronage, not for the Dhamma. And they literally overwhelmed the number of monks who were there who could actually teach the real Dhamma. And so you wind up with a whole bunch of monks now teaching each other the things that they already believed, rather than actually hearing and being able to get the actual real teachings of the Buddha. There was also some other things that were going on at that time. They've now done enough research to where it sounds completely believable that the work called the Digha Nikaya, the Long Sutras, were done in the time of Asok, specifically to make Buddhism attractive to the Brahmins. All right, well, maybe it was too attractive to the Brahmins because they all came, and then they really didn't get the conversion that was needed. So after that time, more and more magical belief systems snuck into Buddhism to the point of making it a Buddhist religion, where at the same time you still had this undercurrent stream of nobles that were always there and have always been there. But that the Buddhist religion has covered over that, and the Buddhist religion is distinct from the noble version of Buddhism in that it has, let us call it a condiment, or salt and peppered by Brahmanism. And that this is how the word or the ideas of rebirth and reincarnation and karma and whatnot have gotten snuck back into Buddhism and infiltrated it even down to the level of the sutras, to the point that you actually need to know the code in order to be able to decipher the sutras. That the sutras are actually quite clear about what's going on, but it's those things that are quite clear about what's going on is said in a magical language. And in fact, you can hear a lot of magical language inside the English language. Atheists will even say, "Oh my God." Why? Because it's built into the language. Just like the concept of an individual or a self, I, me, my, is built right into the language to the point that it's very difficult in English to communicate with each other in a completely Dhamma language, where all of the I, me's, my's, and selfishness are taken out of it. Using a substitution like here, or in this place, this is done. No doer, just doing. So the language itself, the Pali language itself, was a magical language. That it was natural for the Buddha to talk about things in the sense of deities, because that was the language that they were using, knowing that there were no deities. Just like a daddy can talk to his daughter about the bear in the closet. The daughter is not sure if there's a bear in the closet. The dad knows there's no bear in the closet, but he can still talk about it. Okay, so this is basically what's happened with the Digha Nikaya and with other things that makes the religion of Buddhism very magical. And so both sides of it are going to be spread. Now, here's the other side of it that makes it even more complicated. And that is this. the way we are all trained as children, children naturally flock to magical belief systems. Toys are magical belief systems. A little car is just a little car, but in the child's mind, vroom, 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 he's driving that car around, right? It's all about imagination. And so when we teach children about karma, about you do a good thing, you'll get a good result, and if you do a bad thing, you'll get a bad result, that magical belief system keeps going right in as part of our belief system without it actually ever being challenged. But if you challenge it, you'll recognize, oh no, I may not, in fact, get a paycheck. I work all week, but I might not get one. That you have to keep your eye open to see, is this company about to go out of business or what? Are they going to make their last payroll or what? Because you cannot trust that law of karma. The law of karma does not work that way. It always works on an instantaneous level. I smile at you, you smile back. That's it. That's the karma machine. And that's about as far as it goes. So an example of that would be a 14-year-old standing in a bar with his dad, and he sees a man come into the bar and shoot his dad in the back. 7 years later, that man who shot his dad in the back gets shot in the back by that kid. Now, what was the karma? What was the real karma involvement? The karma, the cause and effect was that kid remembered that, and he kept that alive in his own mind with the idea of revenge, and he eventually took his revenge. And so we can look at that as cause and effect, but it didn't take 7 years between the time that he shot the man and then he got shot. But rather, that was kept alive over and over and over and over again by the young boy. He was the one who remembered that, not some karma machine. But everybody starts out as a child in magical thinking. Normally, at the Buddhist temples throughout Thailand, they will do a ceremony that almost always has two qualities to it. One is taking of the triple gem, and the other one is the taking of the precepts. The taking of the triple gem goes something like Buddham Saranam Gacchami, Dhammam Saranam Gacchami, Sangha Saranam Gacchami, Dutiyampi, Buddham Saranam Gacchami. I've done this before. And then the precepts have to do with Panatipata, Vairamani, Sikabadam, Samatiyami, Atinadana, Vairamani, Sikabadam, Samatiyami, Kame Sumi Chachara, Vairamani, Sikabadam, Samatiyami, Musawada, Vairamani, Sikabadam, Samatiyami, and then the really funny one is Surat Meriat Macha, Pamatadana, Vairamani, Sikabadam, Samatiyami. That fifth precept is not part of the Eightfold Noble Path. That was added at a later time, just like the precepts were invented at a later time and are given to the lay people and in the community as a sort of an ideal living, that you have to live this way or the karma machine is going to kick your butt. They also do the triple gem in the sense of taking refuge in the Buddha. Now, here's something that's very, very interesting. This idea of taking the triple gem and the precepts comes right out of one of the suttas, in fact, one of the groups of suttas in the Samyutta Nikaya, which is kind of like a shortcut version of what it is to be Sotapan. Because a real Sotapan, one who really understands the teachings of the Buddha right to his very core, is going to be absolutely taking refuge in the Buddha, in the Dhamma, and in the Sangha, and he is actually going to not be keeping the precepts. His mind is already noble enough that he lives those precepts. This is the behavior of a noble who doesn't kill, doesn't take things from other people. doesn't engage in flirtatiousness or sexual misconduct, does not engage in spreading false lies, rumors, information to tear people apart, or anything like that. So these are the kinds of things that would naturally occur to someone who has a very high mind. But the Buddhist religion has taken this high-mindedness stuff and given it to the children as a set of rules. If they were going to have to be given a set of rules, this is a really excellent set of rules to give them. Unfortunately, none of the kids can live up to it because they don't have the mind of a noble. They have a set of rules that they're supposed to follow. While I've got all of this instinctual lust and desires and ignorances and all of that stuff that is going to work directly against them, trying to keep the precepts. So everyone starts out in magical thinking. Even when a young man ordains as a monk, he will still be kept in that Buddhist religion until he starts asking the right questions. And if he starts asking the right questions to the right teacher or a friend of the right teacher, he's going to start getting the real Dhamma. And that's how it's been now since from the time of Ashoka, but for sure since the time of the Mughals, at least 300 or 400 years. At least 600 years, but it could be, in fact, 1600 years. So that the Dhamma has been hidden from the massive number of people who are still kept, and that's also true even for monks who stay monks for many, many years. But something happened in Thailand in the 1930s that's really, really beneficial for people to understand, and that was that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa started giving public talks on the actual Dhamma that had normally been hidden away. And he got into trouble for this and was actually summoned to Bangkok. I think he was already in Bangkok. He was at a nursing college giving these talks.
Yeah, I did read them. They're pretty radical. And so what's the situation now? Are there followers of Bhikkhu Buddhadasa that teach it openly? To me, it seems like it's pretty an outlier type of teaching all over the world.
It's really not. I'll go into that just a little bit. Okay, the first thing is that on this council, there was a mixture of nobles and those who still believed in the Buddhist religion. And so they had their own conferences with and without Bhikkhu Buddhadasa and with and without other scholars, and that the nobles and the ones who really understood, they convinced the other group that what Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was teaching was right, true, correct, and that they had been wrong their whole lives. It was a wake-up call for many in the Sangha at that time. And so what this council came to was that he was not teaching the wrong thing. He was actually teaching the very best, the highest quality of the Dhamma. He was just teaching it to the wrong people. Because that stuff should be kept within the Sangha. It should not be let out of the Sangha. And he was actually addressing it publicly. All right, fast forward to this time. There is, and I know quite a lot of the history of it, but right now there is a huge, huge organization in Bangkok of Thai people who were absolutely gaga dedicated to Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, and we're talking about the hundreds of thousands of people, with large organizations doing regular videos. One of the video series they're doing right now is going around to old folks who knew Bhikkhu Buddhadasa and getting them to do hour-long interviews. And then they're splicing and dicing with old films, pictures, and everything, and making very high-quality videos. Another part that they're doing is that they're taking every scrap of paper and every lecture and every tape that they could ever find from Bhikkhu Buddhadasa and putting them digitized into a library and put it online. Meanwhile, we've got at least 5 people who are madly translating. Some of them are madder than the others. Translating into English from the Thai language of Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. Dhammarato does this on a regular occasion and has a number of books published. They've given some really, really difficult and high quality stuff from Bhikkhu Buddhadasa that has never been translated to give to my friend Robert because his Thai language is so excellent and his understanding of the teachings of the Bhikkhu Buddhadasa and the Dhamma are so good. But let me tell you a second story. When I was a monk in the United States, I already knew the kind of question to ask, and that the abbot of one of the Thai temples in Chicago was Virasak Viradama. I already knew him from the time that he was at Wat Suan Mok. But I also knew the right question to ask the Thai monks, and I asked Achan Prasert in Fremantle, California, and I knew that that was the right place for me to be when he said, when I asked him did he knew Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, he immediately knew. That was almost like the end question in the Thai Sangha tradition. Do you know Bhikkhu Buddhadasa? Because if you know him, then you know his teachings, which then that means that you're now more than likely practicing correctly. But while I was there, I also, in North Carolina, stayed with Mahasamsak, who was also, even though he was from Surin, which is very close to Cambodia, and knew Cambodian language from childhood, and so therefore he was an abbot at a Cambodian temple. He was trained at Wat Po, but he was also a big fan of Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, and he very much liked that I was giving retreats on using the actual noble supreme Dhamma in the United States. Well, I had a young Lao monk friend. Basically, think of it as 3 brothers. One of them never became a monk, but had a son who became a monk. The second son, which is the most elder, had been a monk from childhood and was one of the most senior monks in the United States at temple in Denver. The third monk worked until he was 65 and retired, and then became a monk at the age of 65, and also because he had been working in the United States for 15 or so years, he had some Social Security. The young monk ordained with his elder uncle through the family connection that he was ordaining and would be a monk as long as his uncle remained alive. But they also became emissaries. And I met them in North Carolina when they were actually living in Amarillo, Texas. And because of the fact that the Laotian language was not his best language, that the young monk's best language was English, because he was born in the United States. He then became my student, and I started teaching him the Noble Dhamma, not realizing that he's going to go check this stuff out with his uncles. Basically, what happened is I got summoned to Denver. That this elderly monk wanted to know who I was, and he invited me there, and that put me in great, good communication with an element of the Sangha that I had never known about, which was in the Lao community of nobles. That, see, I had one time thought that it was only those in Thailand who knew Bhikkhu Buddhadasa were noble. No, many of the nobles knew Bhikkhu Buddhadasa because they already knew the Noble Dhamma. It wasn't that he was the only one who spread it, that there were nobles. I also met a noble, and here's one of the reasons why America has so many nobles hidden away in these Asian temples, is because the Asian people know what to look for in a senior monk that they want to invite to come out of the country of origin into the United States to stay there. And so there is actually quite a lot of nobles in the United States, and I just think that's so marvelous. The only problem is none of them speak English, or very little English. But they are there. So that's the whole quality that I'm trying to get to the students in America, is that there is this undercurrent of nobility that still runs strong in the Sangha. And it's not just in the Theravada, it's in the Japanese, it's in the Zen, it's in the Tibetan. That the Dalai Lama was a personal friend of Bhikkhu Buddhadasa and came to Thailand. Achan Cha was a student of Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. I met Achan Cha at Wat Suan Mok, and as well as Achan Samedo. So this whole quality of nobility is there. And that the actual practices are still alive and still available, but they're still kind of hidden away. And part of the reason that they're hidden away is because it's a major step forward to come out of the belief system that it ain't my fault into, yes, it is 100% totally my responsibility. So long as there's a karma machine, so long as there's a God, so long as there's an authority, so long as there's a big government, a big business, a big education, a big religion, then I do not have to be responsible. That big business also has big psychology, and now it's got big Western Buddhism, and I can go take a meditation course, pay $1,000, and if I don't get what I'm looking for, it must be their fault. So this is one of the things that's happening is that it really is a major change in one's mental frame of reference. And that the Buddha expresses that in this way, no matter how obstructed the mind is, like in beliefs of rebirth. I can clean that stuff out of the mind and come to the realization here and now that this is all there is. This present moment is it. And there is no past. You see, one of the biggest qualities about rebirth is all about the past. Well, the Buddha, we already know, is talking about don't even go back to the past 5 years. Don't even go back last month. If Granny died a year ago, don't go back 1 year. Don't go back and remorse over dead Granny. So if I'm not going to remorse over dead Granny a year ago, why should I remorse over dead me 300 years ago? It makes no sense. There's another quality of that, which I just started to mention, and that is, so doubt has got two qualities to it. One is, whose fault is it anyway? Is it my fault, or can I blame something on the outside? Once we come to that point and cut that in half and say, oh no, this is all my responsibility. I cannot blame anything on the outside. Once we come to that, now the next question is, all right, can I do it? Can I actually clean up my act? Can I actually get my crap together? Can I actually really do that? The answer is yes, we can. Why? Because we've been practicing doing that and we're getting good results at it over and over and over again. And the more good results we get, the more confident we get that we can do this. And so we do not have to hold beliefs about the past or the future, because these are children's stories that are designed to keep children in line. The question is, at what age are people going to grow up? Are they going to grow up at the age of 18 or 20? Are they going to grow up at the age of 45? Are they going to grow up at the age of 72? When are they going to come out of their magical childhood beliefs and come and take the responsibility for themselves? This is all about me. So that's about basically the answer to your question.
Yes.
The rebirth.
Second question, right? We didn't even phrase it for the listeners. But so an example of a Thai monk that I sent to you, or an example of Goenka, where they, talk about next life a lot. Do you feel that they're just not being 100% um, open about things because they would only open up to few students about it, or?
You're making a very, very excellent point. Let me talk to you about that. First off, there is a wide audience of magical thinkers who can gain great benefit from the Dhamma while still having magical thinking, but they will not yet be on the path. They will not yet be noble. They will be ordinary people with ordinary beliefs, but they may be a little bit better ordinary people. So, what has been historically the case is that the monks will talk a long time in a public talk, and they will talk to two audiences. They will talk to the ordinary audience first, because the ordinary audience does not have the ability to pay close attention for a long period of time. And so that's when all of the magical stuff will be talked about. But about halfway through the talk, then the topic will change from more ordinary Buddhist religious talk into more noble talk, because it will possibly go right over the heads of those who don't quite understand it anyway. And that this is an old style way of talking, so that you can talk to both audiences. You wear out the kids, and then you deliver the real stuff to the adults. And we're not talking about, when I'm talking about kids and adults, I'm not talking about the age of people. I'm talking about the mental states that people are in.
So
but
in a way,
there's the other issue. Go ahead.
In a way, if they do start talking about the real teachings right away, they might lose some of the audience because they will not get it right away without.
Right. Because it goes against their deepest fears. But what you can do, instead of talking about there ain't no rebirth, what you can talk about is anatta. There is no self to be reborn. And that's the way you then. So then they may start asking questions about it.
Yeah.
All right. So but let me get into to your actual question and hang on to the next question that you're asking. Okay. The actual question then is, if you've got a noble who is talking to an ignoble audience, then at what level do you do so? So let us say that you've got a group of monks who are invited to do a funeral, and about half the monks are noble and about half the monks are not noble. The monks that are noble are not going to do things that interrupt or disrupt either the group of non-noble monks nor the ignoble crowd. They're going to go along with it. There's no reason to make any trouble at all. That when the time is right, they'll hear the right thing. But there is also the position that no, we're not going to do that. If we're going to be nobles, we're going to be noble. An example of that was my friend David. When he was a monk, he stumbled into a Thai temple in Kuala Lumpur that happened to have had a Sri Lankan monk as the abbot, which sounds really weird until you think about it. Oh no, in Malaysia, and you've got a Thai temple, that's okay to have a Sri Lankan abbot. And he was talking to a Chinese woman about her husband who had just died while David had walked in on the conversation in the hall. And when David heard what this monk was telling this woman, he says, "Oh no, I've got the wrong monk here. This is all magic." But after the conversation, and the woman left all consoled because her husband was going to be in heaven and blah 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 blah. Then this monk turned to David, and David said, "Hi, I'm from Wat Suan Mok," and this big grin broke out on the face of this guy, and all of a sudden it was Dhamma talk, real Dhamma. And that really surprised David. But really what we're talking about here is that some nobles will speak in ignoble terms to ignoble people to give them some benefit in this case. The Dalai Lama is also like that. It is absolutely clear beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Dalai Lama is noble. But he says a lot of stuff that is not noble because his audience is not noble. To where Bhikkhu Buddhadasa would not have any of that. No, he was noble all the time. He would not give in to that duality of ignoble to ignobles and nobles to nobles, which is what they wanted him to do in Bangkok, which then kept that duality of Buddhism religion on the top for everybody, and then this stream of nobility undercurrent. The Bhikkhu Buddhadasa wanted to bring that out, and the way to do it is by being noble all the time, to never go back into the ignoble qualities because the students are expected to be ignoble.
Do you
now,
agree
Western,
with that?
Pardon?
Do you agree with that? Not having the duality?
Not only do I agree with it, but I'm kind of under orders. It is now actually part of the lineage through Achan Po and Bhikkhu Buddhadasa and the Dhammarato and Tun and several other of the teachers that I know of here at Wat Suan Mok. We all teach that way. And that's one thing that Bhikkhu Achan Po and I talked about at great length, was on these Skype calls to do it nobly, that there will be enough students. There are some students who, when they hear it, they don't want any more of it. But, you know, as you can imagine, in fact, since you already, it's not an imagination, as you well know, my standards are pretty high. I require things of the students. One of the things I require of them is to keep calling me back.
Persistence.
Persistence, exactly. Exactly. So yes, that's exactly the way that Achan Po has said it, that it is time to let the noble Dhamma out from under the covers, that we don't need it anymore. It's not dangerous anymore. At one time, it was extraordinarily dangerous to talk about this stuff. That Buddhism has been the object of violence from a number of sources. But on another level, in Asia, the way that Buddhism was always spread was that it was always spread by noble emissaries, so that there was nobility of the Dhamma right from the very beginning. That did not happen with the West. That Buddhism came to the West in bits and pieces and tatters and pebbles, and the noble Dhamma has not come. That it's all come in the sense of, they call it secular, but it's basically money grubbing. It's a business. That most of the people are in business doing the Dhamma, to where always the Dhamma is so valuable, so precious, so noble, that it's to be freely given, never charged for. That in fact, the teacher, by taking a student, has the obligation to make sure that the student is going to do well. So here at my house, I take students. Last week we had 3 at the same time, out of house full. But if I had 6 or 7, that would have been okay. We'd have found a place for them. They might have had to have been in a tent, but the tent would be under the house in case of a rainstorm. But in any case, the point that we're making, in fact, Socrates taught that way. That at the time of his death, he had more than a dozen students living with him. And you can say, oh, poor Mrs. Socrates, what's she going to do? The answer to that, she's got nothing to do, because all of those students are going to do all of the housework and all of the duties. She's going to be the queen of the roost, because all of these, that's exactly what happened here. Tom thought that she was going to have to feed everybody. Oh no, everybody fed her. Because it's a mutual sharing. It's a friendship. It's a quality like that you see quite often in the temples in Thailand. That you can basically walk into any temple in Thailand and stay basically as long as you want to. And if people are behaving badly, they probably won't get chased out of the temple. They'll probably leave because they want to go behave badly someplace else, because this is no fun being bad in the temple. Let's go bad somewhere else. So that's the problem, is that it has come with money. It has come as the Buddhist religion. It has been usurped and battered by a group of medical doctors, psychologists, and even PhDs from Harvard who think that they know the teachings of the Buddha, where none of these guys have ever met a noble, have ever been around a noble, who have even had any contact with actual noble Dhamma. All they have is mostly books written by people who read other books. That's what psychology and mainly, philosophy has now become nothing but a bunch of this generation book readers reading last generation's book readers who's reading last century's authors who did no psychology or philosophy at all other than reading other older books. And so we have now a lineage of book readers. And that lineage of book readers now has been reading some Buddhist books, and they think that they know what they're talking about, when in fact they don't. And so you find up with this conglomerate of the West, of people who teach rebirth, of people who are teaching guruships, of people who are there for sexual exploitation, who are there to charge money. They build B&Bs, and instead of actually running it as a B&B, they invite people into that B&B and call it a retreat and charge them B&B prices. And then don't give them much entertainment, just sit out on the floor and entertain yourself. And we'll call it a meditation retreat and get rich off of it. Or the worst case of all is, let's set up our own lineage and have our own teacher school. Even though I never had a lineage of my own, I've read enough books and I've done enough psychology here. Let me train teachers to be meditation teachers. And so that's what we have now in the West, is we have a westernized Western business model that was taken from the psychologist business model, teaching magic and rebirth, being very business oriented. What's the noble to do? Is a noble going to be like Jesus and go into that temple and clean house? The Buddha did it this way. He would go to the top teachers of all the stuff that was taught and teach them the noble Dhamma, knowing that when they went with the noble Dhamma, their entire student body would go with them into the teachings of nobility. So this is the opportunity. Now that Buddhism has been strongly, wrongly established in the West, It needs already, even though it's hardly 50 years old, it needs a major reformation. I have an assignment for you.
What is it?
Well, you'll figure it out. Now that I've told you about this, you'll figure something out. But we do need to become vocal. We do need to bring the noble Dhamma to the West. And the more deeply into the Dhamma that you get, the more obligated to that Dhamma you will become. The more you understand the nature of reality and the end of suffering, the more you want to be able to teach other people how to get free from suffering. The noble Dhamma is something that we become dedicated to. But it's something wise and worth dedicating ourselves to it. It's not like a strap-on bomb. That's a different kind of dedication. But it still takes the same strong heart. That noble heart, that strong heart, that this is the right way to do it. We know it because we practice it, we've seen it, we've been around other nobles. We know that this is the right way to go. And that this can be spread. It does not have to be kept secret anymore. It can be let out to the West. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of people who know who want to meditate, and they know that whatever they're doing, they're not doing the right thing. And yet with the noble Dhamma, we recognize, oh, it's good in the beginning, it's good in the middle, and it's good in the end. And therefore it is worthwhile. Because people get benefit from it right from the very beginning. You know that. I can see your smile. So anyway, what's your next question?
Oh no, it was actually about the Tibetan teachings, because they sometimes go really into karma and rebirth. So I guess you answered it by giving an example of Dalai Lama. So they are also kind of doing the dual audiences. Is that right?
Yes. So they may be noble in talking in a dual audience mode, or they may be talking everything they know. It's hard to tell.
Today I actually went into, you know how they call it like a YouTube hole, where you just keep watching videos. One video makes you want to watch another video all day long. Today I went into like a Dharma hole, where I was reading an article by and I never knew this was a thing. During Soviet Union, there were actually, very noble Dharma teachers in the Buddhist regions of Russia, like to Mongolia and stuff. And I read examples of what happened to one of them, and there were two cute examples that you might appreciate that relate to nobleness and ability. Women came to this teacher, and there was a stream of water behind the monastery or whatever. I don't think it's called a monastery in Soviet Union. It was, wherever they go to.
How Christian of them to call it a monastery. No, they're not going to call it a monastery.
But there was a stream of water, and people considered it sacred and healing. So women would come to get that water, and they asked the teacher, "Oh, so how great is this water? What are the properties?" And he answered, "This water is amazing at satisfying thirst on a hot day." Isn't that great? And then another example was another family was asking him to calculate astrologically,
Mm-hmm.
a good day for a wedding of their son. And the teacher answered, any day that's convenient for you is a good day. But then, he kind of did the calculation to appease them. But it shows both the noble side and he doesn't want to, disappoint the religious side of the class.
Actually, that's right. First off, in the conversation, it would go like, well, any kind of day would do. What kind of day would you like it to be?
Yeah,
And so the people then tell him, and then he says, okay, I'll now do my astrology chart.
yeah,
Oh, guess what? You were right.
yeah,
That's right. So that there is a certain kind of nobility that is within, especially within the Buddha Sangha, that is hidden away because they know that most of the people are not ready for it. But now Bhikkhu Buddhadasa and Achan Po and myself believe, oh no, there is now room for it to become quite open. And now that I've been teaching Noble Dhamma on the internet for 4 years, not once has anybody come into the art of the gun.
oh.
Now, if I was in Alabama, I'm not sure that that would be the case, but stuck on an island here in Thailand, it's a little bit inconvenient for people to come gunning for me just because they don't like what to teach.
Yeah,
But that's not always been the case. Been a lot of nobles been killed because of their noble teachings. Socrates is my best example. But it also shows that nobility is almost natural, is quite possible that someone can actually start looking at what's going on and seeing things as they are and grow up and mature on their own. The world is filled with such people. The thing that makes the Buddha so unique is that he figured out a way, a process, a system, a method for people to come out of their ignoble lifestyle into a noble lifestyle. That's what makes the teaching of the Buddha so remarkable, is that it's a system that actually works to where most people who are capable of coming out, by the way, they have a name to them, they call them Paticca Buddhas, that come to become Buddhas naturally, but they normally don't teach because they don't really know how they came to it. They just, they teach some nice stuff, but they don't have an actual method the way that the Buddha has this Dhamma that's laid out that's clear and possible for anyone to follow. And so we'll let that out. We're going to make it publicly available. If YouTube is going to be, let us say, considerate, they may leave these 200 videos up for the long haul, and therefore in the next years after I'm dead, there'll be thousands of people who benefit by hearing these videos.
I see.
And we need that. Pardon?
You're getting a lot of new students. I see that they're talking about you on Reddit a lot. So you probably have an influx of students coming from that. You find yourself being very busy probably every day.
Yes, in fact, someone called while you were on. I'll call him back as soon as we're finished here.
Okay.
All right. Do you feel comfortable with your understanding of this issue about rebirth?
I do. Yeah, I just had doubts because, you would read these noble sounding teachers talking about rebirth and karma, and it's confusing why, because you present it differently, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa also. That was my confusion. what was going on there.
Okay. I would go so far as to say that I, at that time, let us say, upon recollection and reflection of Goenka, after I figured out and understood what noble was, I would say that yes, he was noble. However, that he would ask for blessings from his students for his next rebirth would not go against that, especially if he was addressing a particular audience. For instance, if the audience was all Westerners, I would be curious. But if he said that to a group of Indians, and he was Indian, he lived in India, he was, and so if he's talking to the Indians about that, then that would have been absolutely called for, par for the course.
It was, one of the pre-recorded lessons. I think it's day 10 on day 9, evening number 9, where he starts teaching metta for the first time.
Yes, as part of metta.
And he goes into, and by the way, now that you know about metta, please send me some for, a next life. That was interesting.
Right, but when he said next life, he could have been meaning the next retreat, or when I go out and get into the car, or
yeah.
Yes, there's this coded language about what is a lifetime. If the self arises and passes away on a moment by moment basis, then that would be a lifetime. That birth of that self lasted long enough to say ouch, and then it died. And so many lifetimes I've been sitting here with you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, is there any other questions that you have for right now? Because I know that your practice is going well.
I need to work on it, but it's going.
All right. Well, we'll finish now then, and hope to see you again soon.
Yes, thank you so much. Till next time. Have a wonderful day.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye.